The most famous paintings of Edward Hopper. In this video, we will see Hopper's most famous paintings. The most famous American artist of American Realism in the entire history of art. Nighthawks. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1942. Nighthawks hang out in the typical American cafe. The streets are deserted, the lights off. The only light is from the bar, and the only figures are these three customers and the bartender, who do not interact with each other. It could very well be a scene from any film noir. Night Owls is a portrait of the loneliness of the big city, in this case New York. Solitude was Hopper's specialty, who often painted this type of nocturnal scenes, with characters in silence, lost in thought, and almost always places the viewer outside, spying on them. We are all voyeurs, as Hopper well knew. It is strange, in this cafeteria we do not see any door to enter or exit. Maybe these night owls live in that fish tank. Night Windows. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1928. The city succumbs to the charms of electric light, and the freshly lit night of the Roaring Twenty prolongs its bustle in cafes, theaters and cabarets, revolutionizing the senses of the artists who, of course, did not want to miss it. The Night Owl City would then open up a range of contrasts in scenes, light, color, shadows, characters and, above all, souls. But Hopper, far from the madding crowd, in this case puts the spotlight on any apartment, turns on the light and our curiosity, and without realizing it we are already snooping on that suggestive woman. A breath of fresh air in the middle of a muggy New York summer night draws us into the silence of the room. The subtle current of air expands the interior atmosphere through the curtain that flies diagonally and seems to invite us to enter. Its spontaneity and lightness contrast with the geometry and solidity of the building that, like a puppet theater, frames the enigmatic scene. Two light bulbs modulate colors and contrasts at night, with a cinematographic effect, very Hopper, raising in us, onlookers, questions about this reclining woman. Is she petting the cat or is she talking to a child? Perhaps he will have finally finished tidying up the room? Is he just picking up something he dropped? We'll never know. Boy and Moon. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1907. One never gets to know a person in his entirety. Boy and the Moon reminds us of that. Edward Hopper has been studied over the years as one of the representatives of American Realism. His relationship with cinema and literature has been exalted. He has made us feel silence with each of his works, and, despite so many fans of art, studies and years of admiration, there are works like Niño y Luna that seem to break with what we know about the person. Works of which there is not enough information or that are not among his most recognized. How many things will we not know about each artist? Hopper was approximately 24 years old when he made this drawing and was struggling to define his style, just a year before he had started working in an advertising agency in New York, and, although illustration was not to his liking, he had to dedicate himself to it for almost 20 years until his career as a painter had further development. Boy and Moon presents a somewhat surreal scene, and Hopper's statement, "Paint thoughts, not facts," seems to make more sense than ever. One could spend hours trying to decipher the work. Does the child turn to see what is coming or what was? A dream? Hopper has managed to capture in his works the color of loneliness and, in my opinion, longing for or fearing something. The meaning of the painting will change depending on the person. Perhaps when he mentioned painting thoughts he was not only referring to his own, but to those of the viewer. And you, what do you dream of? What do you fear? Morning Sunday artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1952. Once again, Hopper paints Josephine as a model in solitude and silence, bathed in the light of the morning sun. When Josephine posed for this painting, she was 69 years old, and the artist shows how well preserved her muse was. The painting is beautifully austere, the model on her bed, and an unadorned room with a window showing blue sky and a red brick building. That's it. With that, Hopper perfectly captures the American city. The painter takes to the canvas his hundreds of sketches on that simple idea that haunted his head, the contrast between interior and exterior and the morning light affecting all the elements. Of course, this painting is another example of silence. In Hopper's work, even though there are several characters, no one seems to communicate with anyone. Apparently, that was a reflection of the artist himself, who was quite sparing in words. In front of the chatty and short Josephine, the tall Hopper was a most silent type. He already said it himself, if it could be said with words, it would not be necessary to paint. House by the Railroad. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1925. Hopper jumps ahead of the Depression a few years to show us rural America. Lonely America. Mysterious America. In the 1920s, due to industrialization, the entire country decided to move to the city, and houses like this one remained as vestiges of the past. Mansions stood alone among meadows, forests, or next to train tracks like this one. The train as a synonym of industry, and a Victorian house that remains silent and lonely, although we can perceive that the place lived through periods of splendor. It is as if this construction was watching progress pass by and remains unchanged in place, preserving a dignity that is broken over time. The sunset will also enhance that melancholic and twilight tone that many of Hopper's paintings have. Also, you don't see many people around the place. If you look closely, the windows are closed, and that indicates an abandonment, but at the same time suggests an interior life within its walls, almost like a disturbing threat. Precisely this concern was a clear influence for other artists such as Alfred Hitchcock, who saw in this painting a potential location for one of his great films, Psycho, from 1960, and built a house like this in California that gave life to the house of Norman Bates and his mother Lady. Automat. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1927. A girl is having a coffee sitting in an automat, a typical catering establishment from the 1920s. There were no waiters to serve, a few coins in a machine, and the customer would withdraw their drink. It is the perfect place for one of the works of the new North American realist Edward Hopper, with its lonely people, who do not say a word to anyone. We don't know what happens to the girl. Hopper as always gives small clues. It is we, viewers, who have to imagine his story. The girl doesn't look very happy. He looks at his coffee in a melancholic attitude. She's dressed up and maybe she has a date. Perhaps he is going to or coming from work. Perhaps she is just a regular customer of the place, an automaton herself, always in the same place at the same time. A time that is not clear either. As in his Nighthawks, it is night, and there is no sign of activity, neither inside nor outside the premises. Everything in Hopper is unknown. Blue Night. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1914. Hopper is always referring to time in his titles, perhaps to further mark the loneliness, the silence, the vigil of night owls like him. An afternoon in a cafe. A terrace full of figures that do not speak. Of all the characters, the one that jumps out at our eyes is that clown, the center of the composition, and a standing woman, almost equally made up. All in a quite unusual composition for the time that links him with Degas and other impressionists. The truth is that among Hopper's ambitions was not to be at the forefront of art. And in those days, being an artist in Paris, it was almost an obligation to embrace one of the avant-garde movements. Hopper preferred to be a realist, a new realist, and he was practically left alone. That is why there are those who see in this Blue Night a self-portrait. Hopper is a clown sitting with his friend Van Gogh, but without speaking. Don't spoil the magic. Compartment C, Car 293. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1938. A trip on an old train, with the car to yourself, with silence, with enough time to think about your things, to read, to reflect on what has brought you there. Outside, the landscape unfolds like a dream. And maybe inside too. This woman is nowhere in particular. That's what happens during a trip. The continuous movement. She is in a train car, but before she could have been alone at the station, in a restaurant, in a hotel room, filling up gas at a service station lost in the middle of nowhere. Always in places of transit, ephemeral homes for people in perpetual motion. Hopper always paints these kinds of people, lonely, silent, people who seem to be trying to escape from something. Always self-absorbed, unable to put order in their lives. Always still as statues, but paradoxically always on the move, although it seems that they will never ever escape from those places. Hopper also traveled in his youth. He went to Paris to meet the artists he liked, to London, Berlin and Brussels, to Spain to see Goya's painting firsthand. And in his travels through Europe, he adopted the central theme of his pictorial production, loneliness. He must have felt himself only in those trains, airplanes and ships that took him from one place to another. Just that I had to paint it over and over again. When he finally returned to the United States, he would never travel again until his death. There he would dedicate himself to painting the very essence of loneliness, everyday life. Interior Courtyard, 48 Rue de Lille, Paris. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1906. On his first trip to Europe, Hopper lived at this address, 48 Rue de Lille, and captured several of the spaces in this building, including this evocative interior courtyard with a window. Painter of stopped time, of a light that illuminates, but hardly warms, Edward Hopper eliminates all human figures, but leaves the light. He was 24 years old and had been studying for some time to work as an illustrator. In Paris, he is not interested in avant-gardes or modernities. He only paints simple streets, bridges, the Louvre or interiors like this one, which somehow captures the atmosphere of the city. The light of Paris was unlike anything I had ever known before. The shadows were luminous, reflective light. Even under bridges. After several trips to his favorite city, Hopper returns home and begins to tour the United States, always by car, capturing with his personal realism the night bars, the miserable motels, the loneliness. That light he discovered was tattooed on his mind. In Paris. Sunset Railroad. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1929. We had already seen Hopper painting a house next to the railway, and during his career the painter made many other paintings related in one way or another to the railway. It is like a portrait of mobility and rootlessness suggested by the train, a type of transport that proliferated in the United States with the economic depression of the 1930s and became an iconographic, almost mythological element in those years of exodus and collective illusions. Hopper has the trip in mind as an exit towards a destination. Trains, stations, motels, shops, offices. Hopper's characters are never home, although we assume they want to get there. If there are characters. Here we only see a lonely landscape. It is sunset in New England and the train tracks shine with the sunset. Against the light, we see on the left a solitary interlocking post. Hopper wants with his palette to be realistic for modernity. He wants to faithfully reproduce natural phenomena such as a sunset, but he can't help but give that touch of unreality of his own. The sky seems to bleed in this work. Chop Suey. Artwork by Edward Hopper from the year 1929. Edward Hopper represents in Chop Suey a most normal scene, two women sitting face to face in a cafeteria. If we look at the details, we see another couple in the background, a coat hanging on the wall, a small lamp, a kettle on the table, the sign of the restaurant outside, the facial features of the woman we have front, and the back of the figure with whom he converses. However, the rest of the elements are represented with very little detail, as if Hopper were painting from an image from his memory, of which he only clearly remembered certain objects, thus fleeing from pure realism. With all these details, we can get an idea of the atmosphere of the restaurant, the voices of the diners, the lighting, the smell of the food. Hopper does not tell us a story, but rather tells us about feelings and sensations. Most of his work speaks of loneliness. In this case, although the scene takes place in a social environment, we can perceive that no interaction is really taking place between people, but that each one is isolated and immersed in their world, and despite using mostly warm colors, we can feel a certain apathy or sadness. There are also those who interpret that another of the themes represented is the encounter of one with oneself or with one's double, given that the two women wear very similar hats, but this hypothesis has been ruled out. That was all for today's video. Tell us what you thought, and if you liked it, please give us your subscription and your like. This way you support the art community on YouTube. Until the next video, have a nice day.